Hello, this is Ron Paul with your weekly update for August 1st. One might think that the recent drama over the debt ceiling involves one side wanting to increase or maintain spending with the other side wanting to drastically cut spending, but that is far from the truth. In spite of the rhetoric being thrown around, the real debate is over how much government spending will increase. No plan under serious consideration cuts spending in the way you and I think about it. Instead, the cuts being discussed are illusory and are not cuts from current amounts being spent, but cuts in projected spending increases. This is akin to a family saving $100,000 in expenses by deciding not to buy a Lamborghini and instead getting a fully loaded Mercedes when really their budget dictates that they need to stick with their perfectly serviceable Honda. But this is the type of math Washington uses to mask the incriminating truth about the unrepentant plundering of the American people. The truth is that frightening rhetoric about default and full faith of the credit of the United States is being carelessly thrown around to ram through a bigger budget than ever in spite of stagnant revenues. If your family's income did not change year over year, would it be wise financial management to accelerate spending so you would feel richer? That is what our government is doing, with one side merely suggesting a different list of purchases than the other. In reality, bringing our fiscal house into order is not that complicated or excruciatingly painful at all. If we simply kept spending at current levels, by their definition of cuts, that would save nearly $400 billion in the next few years versus the $25 billion the Budget Control Act claims to cut. It would only take us 5 years to cut $1 trillion in Washington math just by holding the line on spending. That is hardly austere or catastrophic. A balanced budget is similarly simple and within reach if Washington had just a tiny amount of fiscal common sense. Our revenues currently stand at approximately $2.2 trillion a year and are likely to remain stagnant as the recession continues. Our outlays are $3.7 trillion and projected to grow every year. Yet we only have to go back to 2004 for federal outlays of $2.2 trillion, and the government was far from small that year. If we simply refer to that year's spending levels, which would hardly be austere, we would have a balanced budget right now. If we held the line on spending and the economy actually did grow as estimated, the budget would balance on its own by 2015 with no cuts whatsoever. We pay 35% more for our military today than we did 10 years ago for the exact same capabilities. The same could be said for the rest of the government. Why has our budget doubled in 10 years? This country doesn't have double the population or double the land area or double anything that would require the federal government to grow by such an obscene amount. In Washington terms, a simple freeze in spending would be a much bigger cut than any plan being discussed. If politicians simply cannot bear to implement actual cuts to actual spending, just freezing the budget would give the economy the best chance to catch its breath, recover, and grow. Thanks for calling this update. A new update is placed on this number, 888-322-1414, every Monday. The written text can be found on my webpage, www.house.gov/Paul, under the heading Texas Straight Talk. Thanks for calling.
Let's go over to the House, which about 45 minutes ago passed Speaker Boehner's debt plan. We're now joined by Texas Republican Congressman and presidential hopeful Ron Paul. As always, Mr. Paul, welcome back to the program. I read a piece in the Daily Caller today. You want to say no to business as usual, status quo empowering compromise to raise the debt ceiling. You are opposed to any debt ceiling increases. With all respect, isn't that irresponsible? How can we operate without more borrowing?
Of course, that's why I want to stop the borrowing. I think it's irresponsible to keep borrowing. If you have a debt problem, how do you solve the debt problem by raising the debt? See, that doesn't make any sense to me. And it's a spending problem, and the Congress and the people don't want us to really quit spending. Anytime you have a token little cut, they yell and scream. So this crisis is going to evolve. I think, you know, everybody's talking about the default, but there's not going to be any default in the sense that we're not going to send the checks out and pay the interest. That's going to happen. That's not. You look at the bonds today; they did quite well. Interest rates are going down. Nobody's worrying about it. But the default comes when we just print the money and pass it out, and the default comes because people are going to lose their purchasing power of the dollar, and that's where the real problem is coming.
I just want to circle back, though, because you've got 100 million checks being mailed. And yes, you could cover the interest on the debt. I fully agree with you. And the government bond market is trading very nicely off of the recessionary forecast, 275%. But what about the 100 million checks? That's the position you'd put in. Social Security, health care, veterans, pensions, the military troops fighting, the FBI. In other words, if you don't raise the debt ceiling at all, you would wreak havoc on the budget, havoc on the states, havoc on the cities. I just don't see how you can take that position, Mr. Paul.
And Larry, you know something about runaway inflation, severe inflation. You remember the 1970s. I think you were in Washington at the time. Remember the dollar was under attack. We went hat in hand to the IMF and got $30 billion, equivalent to $300 billion to bail out our dollar. So we were on the rocks then, and that was a bailout again. And in a way, it was a default during that year when we reneged on our promises to pay with the Bretton Woods Agreement. So yes, I think it's much worse to do what we're doing, continue to spend, and usher in an age when none of all the checks bounce, and that is going to be much worse. You have to have priorities, and if Congress doesn't give the president priorities on how to pay the bills, the president, I believe, has the prerogative of picking and choosing and spending the money as it comes in, and face up to the fact that we are bankrupt. To deny that we're not bankrupt is a big problem, and it will usher in this age of just endless spending and endless debt. You cannot solve the problem of debt by accumulating more debt. You would never tell an individual that's way over their head, you know, with credit card, oh, well, what you need is more debt, and you're going to be happy. The country can't do it either.
All right, let me ask you this, Congressman. In your campaign, will you actually put out a blueprint plan for a balanced budget in 10 years? Because I know the balanced budget amendment is in the new House plan. I understand that. But the odd thing to me, as a former budget official, is I have never seen anybody put on paper a plan that gets us to zero on the deficit in 10 years. Will you have such a plan on your campaign trail?
Well, you know, I can make it very simple. Let's just freeze the budget. Give everybody this year what they got last year, and it would finally balance probably in less time than that. So that would be a pretty good blueprint, and why should anybody scream? Do you know, Larry, how much spending, even under the Boehner plan, the spending is going up over $1 trillion. So all these cuts are fictitious. They're only cuts in the CBO projected increases. So it's all a fraud. It's all this talk. We know this is all a political gamesmanship. This bill has nothing to do with solving the problem.
I agree with you, sir, but it's the balanced budget plan. I want to see one on paper. Anyway, Congressman Paul, we're out of time, but I appreciate your time very much this evening. Good luck on the campaign.
Hi.
As we continue our live coverage of the House vote on the Boehner bill coming up.
It's impossible to predict the time when confidence will be lost, but it can come quickly. Resorting to buying other paper currencies will not be of much help. When the dollar crashes, most likely the purchasing power of all currencies, since all currencies hold dollars as a reserve, will go down as well. This means that dollars and other currencies will go into buying consumer items, precious metals, and other physical properties. Consumer prices will soar, as well as interest rates. The central bank will lose control, and the more they inflate, the worse the confidence becomes. The interest rates will respond to these efforts by rising sharply. If the Fed tries to reverse the run on the dollar, interest rates will also soar, and the pain on the American citizens will be of such proportion that political chaos will result. Either scenario leads to political and social chaos, the third event, and the most dangerous. With no ability of the federal government to fund its commitments, international or domestic, major changes will occur in our system. The social unrest will elicit cries for government to exert unusual force to head off a complete breakdown of law and order. The ultimate trap will be set for a system of government claiming to protect a free society. If more power and police authority are not given to the federal government, it will be argued that only anarchy will result. If more government policing power is given, it will mean a lethal threat to civil liberties. Already, we have permitted the notion that a single person, the Attorney General or the President, can decide who is an enemy combatant, thus denying that individual the right of habeas corpus, permitting indefinite detentions without charges made. This attitude towards civil liberties has changed significantly since the fear built around 9/11. Yes, I know, declaring one an enemy combatant is reserved only for the radical Muslims engaged in terrorism against the United States. To be reassured by this reasoning is quite dangerous and naive. Logic should not lead us to equate suspects with terrorists and include American citizens, and yet this has already been set by precedent. Under difficult circumstances, our political leaders will not be hesitant to use these powers to maintain order. Tragically, the people may even demand it. We are rapidly moving toward a dangerous time in our history. Society as we know it is vulnerable to political and social unrest. This impending crisis comes as a consequence of our flawed foreign and domestic economic policies, a silly notion about money, ignorance about central banking, and ignoring the onerous power and mischief of out-of-control intelligence agencies. Our unsustainable welfare state and a willingness to sacrifice privacy and civil liberties in an attempt to achieve safety and security from an inept government. Dangerous times indeed. What can be done about it? Must we wait for the inevitable and expect to restore our liberties in a street fight against the overwhelming power of the state? Not a good option. The only way that we can prevent blood from running in the streets is to offer a better idea of the proper role of government in a society that desires first and foremost liberty. And that is impossible without a firm commitment by our thought leaders to the ideas of freedom, the source of all creative energy and prosperity. An all-powerful state is the threat to that ideal. The prevailing attitude of the people, as it once was in early America, must be that of liberty and self-reliance, rather than the nanny state and dependency. Rely on the government force to mold all private choices. If this is understood, a smooth, although not painless, transition to a free society is achievable. Ignoring this option will be very destructive to everything that is dear to the hearts of most Americans. What is it that we must do? We must immediately embark on balance the budget by reducing spending, change our foreign policy to that of non-intervention, a full audit and more supervision of the Federal Reserve, leading to abolishing the Federal Reserve, legalize competition to the Federal Reserve with competing currencies, regain respect for civil liberties and privacy while reining in the CIA, wean ourselves off the dependence of wealth transfers by government, abolish crony capitalism, no subsidies, no bailouts, no regulatory or tax privileges to protect the powerful elite, especially the military-industrial complex, eliminate the income tax, the inheritance tax, and taxes on savings and dividends. None of this can happen without the restoration of Congress to its dominant position of the three branches of government, as was originally intended by the Constitution. The executive and the judicial must be reined in, and Congress must assert its prerogatives over all legislation curtailing all unconstitutional agendae through budgetary controls. Signs abound that angry Americans are now more ready than ever before for a change in direction that is indeed real. If this program were improvised, even suddenly and dramatically, the adjustment, though significant and to a degree somewhat painful, would be much shorter and of minor consequence compared to the chaos and poverty that will result if we refuse to change our gluttonous appetite for a free lunch.